Before giving up on someone, the psyche often asks for something simple, yet profoundly difficult: to see clearly, not through hope, not through fear, but through consciousness. Carl Jung understood that many relationships do not fail because love is absent, but because unconscious dynamics remain unseen. People often leave too early, or stay too long, for the same reason. They are not relating to the person in front of them, but to an inner image, a wound, or an unresolved expectation. Jung believed that love becomes destructive when it is driven by unconscious need, and yet that same love can become transformative when the unconscious is brought into awareness. This is why not giving up does not mean enduring endlessly. It means pausing long enough to understand what is actually happening. Many times, what feels like incompatibility is really unspoken fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of dependence, fear of being truly seen. These fears do not announce themselves clearly. They hide behind arguments, distance, silence, or emotional withdrawal. Jung called this the language of the shadow. The shadow speaks indirectly. It expresses itself through irritation, through disappointment, through sudden disconnection. Before giving up on someone, it is essential to ask, what part of me is being activated here? Not what are they doing wrong, but what is this relationship revealing about me? Love often brings us into contact with unfinished parts of ourselves, parts that seek healing but resist exposure. This resistance can feel like exhaustion, like confusion, like the sense that something is wrong. But Jung warned that not everything uncomfortable is destructive. Some discomfort is the psyche stretching beyond old limits. A relationship that challenges you is not automatically unhealthy. It may be confronting the version of you that learned to survive by closing off. This is why Jung emphasized reflection over reaction. When conflict appears, the immediate impulse is to withdraw or to blame. But reflection asks something deeper. What am I being invited to become here? Not for the other person, but for myself. Love, in its deeper sense, is not about comfort. It is about individuation, the process of becoming whole. And individuation rarely feels smooth. It often arrives as tension, as contradiction, as moments where old identities begin to fracture. Before giving up on him, it is worth noticing whether the relationship is damaging yourself or challenging your ego. There is a crucial difference. One erodes your vitality, the other demands growth. Jung believed that true love does not ask you to disappear. It asks you to appear more fully, to speak more honestly, to feel more consciously, to take responsibility for your inner life. This kind of love is demanding. It strips away illusion, but it also offers something rare: the possibility of transformation through relationship. And this possibility cannot be evaluated quickly. It requires presence. It requires patience. It requires courage to look inward before walking away. The psyche always leaves clues, subtle signals, emotional patterns, repeating conflicts. Nothing is random. What repeats wants to be understood, and understanding is the threshold between unconscious attachment and conscious love. As awareness deepens, the question slowly shifts. It is no longer, should I stay or should I leave? It becomes, what is this relationship asking me to see? Jung believed that relationships function as mirrors of the psyche. They reflect not only love, but fear, defense, and unmet needs. When these reflections are ignored, decisions are made impulsively. When they are explored, clarity emerges. Clarity does not rush. It unfolds. Another layer reveals itself in how conflict is experienced. Conflict is often treated as evidence of failure. But Jung saw conflict as a sign of psychological life. Where there is no conflict, there is often repression. The key is not the absence of tension, but the ability to hold it consciously. A relationship that allows reflection in moments of tension is very different from one that punishes vulnerability. Before giving up, notice whether honesty is possible. Not perfect communication, but real expression. Can you speak without fear of annihilation? Can you listen without immediate defense? These are deeper indicators than harmony. Jung believed that true connection does not eliminate difference. It integrates it. Another important question arises. Are you staying to avoid loneliness, or because growth is still unfolding? Loneliness and growth can feel surprisingly similar. Both are uncomfortable. Both disrupt familiarity. But one contracts the psyche, the other expands it. Expansion often feels destabilizing before it feels strengthening. This is why many people leave at the exact moment when something meaningful is beginning to surface, not because the relationship failed, but because it crossed a threshold. Thresholds are frightening. They dissolve old identities. They demand responsibility. Before giving up, it is worth observing whether your exhaustion comes from emotional harm or from inner resistance to change. Harm diminishes your sense of self. Resistance challenges it. The difference can be felt in the body. Harm tightens and collapses. Resistance agitates and stirs. Jung emphasized the body as a carrier of psychological truth. Listening to these signals requires slowing down, and slowing down is often the hardest step in a culture that urges quick decisions. Another subtle sign appears in how blame operates. If the relationship is only about what the other person must fix, reflection has stopped. If the relationship invites you to examine your own patterns without self-condemnation, a deeper process may still be active. This does not excuse harmful behavior. Consciousness is never passive, but it does ask for differentiation. Not every struggle means stay. Not every discomfort means leave. Understanding must come before action. Otherwise, the psyche repeats the same dynamic in a different form, and repetition without awareness is how lessons grow louder instead of clearer. This is why Jung believed that insight is not a luxury in love. It is a necessity, and insight takes time. Time to observe, time to feel, time to recognize what is truly being asked of you before making a decision that shapes not only the relationship, but your inner trajectory. As this inner observation continues, something important begins to surface. You start to notice whether effort flows in both directions, not in equal measure, but in shared responsibility. Jung understood that relationships collapse when one person carries the psychological weight for both. Love cannot survive when one becomes the container for another's unconsciousness. Before giving up, it is worth asking whether the other person is capable of reflection, not perfection, not constant awareness, but the willingness to look inward. When conflict arises, growth requires participation. If only one psyche is evolving, the tension becomes unsustainable. Another distinction emerges between patience and self-abandonment. Jung never advocated endurance without awareness. Patience serves growth only when the self remains intact. When staying requires shrinking, silencing, or betraying inner truth, the psyche begins to fracture. This fracture is not subtle. It appears as chronic exhaustion, loss of vitality, or emotional numbness. Before giving up, notice whether the relationship asks you to expand or to disappear. Expansion may feel uncomfortable, but it increases aliveness. Disappearance feels safe at first, but leads to emptiness. Another layer unfolds. In how hope operates. Hope can sustain growth, or postpone truth. Jung warned that hope, when disconnected from reality, becomes a defense. It protects against grief by delaying it, but delayed grief returns with greater force. Conscious hope is different. It does not deny what is present. It acknowledges limitation, while remaining open. Before giving up, observe whether your hope is grounded in change that is happening, or in change that is imagined. This distinction prevents self-deception. Another important signal is how conflict resolves. Does it lead to greater understanding, even slowly, or does it reset without integration? Repetitive conflict without insight is not transformation. It is stagnation. Jung believed stagnation was one of the most damaging states for the psyche. Movement, even painful movement, is healthier than static repetition. Before giving up, ask whether something is evolving, not dramatically, but measurably. Subtle shifts count. Small increases in honesty, moments of accountability, greater emotional clarity. These are signs of life. Without them, effort becomes sacrifice, and sacrifice without meaning breeds resentment. Resentment erodes love quietly. By the time it becomes visible, the inner bond is already weakened. This is why Jung emphasized conscious evaluation over emotional impulse. Leaving too soon and staying too long often come from the same root. Avoidance of conscious responsibility. Responsibility to oneself. Responsibility to the truth of the situation. Only when this responsibility is taken can a decision, whether to stay or to leave, be made without regret. And this clarity does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates through attention, honesty, and the courage to see what is actually happening, rather than what one wishes were true. As this clarity continues to accumulate, the psyche begins to shift from emotional reactivity to psychological positioning. You are no longer pulled immediately by fear or hope. You begin to stand somewhere more centered. Jung believed this centering was essential before any decisive action. Without it, decisions are made to escape discomfort, not to honor truth. Another realization appears around responsibility. You see more clearly what is yours to work on and what is not. This distinction is crucial. Taking responsibility for your inner life is empowering. Taking responsibility for another's growth is exhausting. Before giving up, notice whether you are trying to change someone or to understand yourself. Change imposed on the other creates resistance. Understanding yourself creates freedom. Another shift occurs in how attachment feels. It becomes less desperate. The fear of losing the relationship no longer eclipses self-respect. Jung believed that when self-respect returns, the psyche is stabilizing. Stability does not mean certainty. It means you can tolerate not knowing without collapsing. This tolerance allows truth to surface naturally. Another subtle sign is how silence is experienced. Silence used to feel threatening. Now it feels informative. You notice what arises in silence without rushing to fill it. This reveals what the relationship is truly built upon. If silence produces insight, there is still inner work unfolding. If silence produces only anxiety and confusion, something essential may be missing. Jung understood that the unconscious speaks most clearly when external noise diminishes. This is why slowing down is not avoidance. It is listening. Another important development is how desire aligns with values. You no longer want the relationship at any cost. You want it at the cost of being yourself. If the price is too high, desire begins to reorganize. This reorganization is not rejection. It is self-alignment. Jung believed alignment with the self was the deepest form of loyalty. Loyalty to truth must precede loyalty to attachment. This does not eliminate love. It refines it. Love becomes less about possession and more about recognition. Recognition of what is possible and what is not. As this recognition stabilizes, the question of staying or leaving loses its emotional charge. It becomes a practical inquiry, one that can be answered without urgency, without drama, without self-betrayal. And this is where real freedom begins to emerge, not in the decision itself, but in the quality of consciousness from which the decision will eventually arise. As this freedom grows, the relationship is no longer the sole reference point for your emotional balance. This is a quiet but decisive shift. Jung understood that when a relationship stops being the psychological center, it can finally be seen clearly. You are no longer negotiating from fear of loss, but from inner stability. From this place, you begin to notice something important. You can imagine both possibilities, staying and leaving, without panic. Neither feels like annihilation. This is a sign that the psyche is no longer fused with the outcome. Fusion creates blindness. Differentiation restores sight. Another subtle change appears in how you interpret effort. Effort is no longer measured by how much you endure, but by how much awareness is present. Jung believed suffering without awareness was meaningless, but suffering with awareness was transformative. Before giving up, you sense whether effort is producing insight or merely exhaustion. Insight energizes, even when it hurts. Exhaustion drains, even when nothing dramatic is happening. This distinction becomes clearer. As inner noise quiets, another layer unfolds in how compassion operates. Compassion no longer means self-sacrifice. It becomes understanding without self-erasure. You can acknowledge the other person's wounds without carrying them. You can care without rescuing. Jung saw rescuing as a form of unconscious control. True compassion respects limits. Respecting limits protects the psyche. As this protection strengthens, you stop negotiating with yourself. You no longer try to convince yourself that things are better or worse than they actually are. Reality becomes sufficient. And reality, when faced directly, is surprisingly grounding. Another sign of this stage is how repetition is perceived. You notice patterns without needing to explain them away. What repeats is no longer confusing. It becomes informative. Jung believed repetition was the psyche's way of insisting that something be recognized. Once recognized, repetition loses its urgency. Before giving up, you often reach this moment, the moment when nothing new needs to be proven. The relationship has shown what it can show, not as a verdict, but as information. This does not force a decision. It prepares one, and preparation is different from pressure. Pressure demands immediate action. Preparation allows timing. Jung trusted timing. He believed the psyche knew when a process had reached maturity, not through logic, but through a felt sense of readiness. This readiness does not shout. It settles. And as it settles, you realize that whatever choice eventually comes, staying or leaving, will no longer be an escape. It will be an expression of consciousness, and that difference changes everything. As this readiness settles in, the emotional urgency that once dominated begins to dissolve, not because the feelings disappear, but because they are no longer driving blindly. Jung believed that when consciousness enters a situation, compulsion loosens its grip. You are no longer pushed forward or pulled backward. You are standing. From this position, the relationship reveals its true shape. Not the imagined one, not the feared one, the real one. And seeing reality clearly is one of the most loving acts you can offer to yourself and to the other. At this stage, giving up no longer feels like failure, and staying no longer feels like self-betrayal. Both options lose their emotional charge. They become possibilities, rather than threats. This is the point Jung described as psychological adulthood, where choices are not made to soothe anxiety, but to honor truth. Truth does not shout. It feels steady. It feels grounded. It does not promise happiness, but it offers integrity. You begin to sense that whatever happens next will not fragment you. You will remain intact. This realization alone changes the entire emotional landscape. Love stops being a battlefield and becomes a place of understanding. Understanding of limits. Understanding of potential. Understanding of what can grow and what has reached its natural boundary. Jung believed that every relationship has its own lifespan. Some are meant to transform us and remain. Others are meant to transform us and release us. Knowing the difference requires patience, honesty, and the courage to stay conscious until the answer reveals itself. And when that answer begins to emerge, it does so quietly, not as an impulse, but as a deep inner alignment that no longer needs justification. From here, the final step is no longer dramatic. It is simply true. Carl Jung believed that love is not meant to trap us in confusion, but to awaken us to consciousness. Before giving up on someone, what truly matters is not how intense the emotions are, but how much awareness the relationship invites. When awareness is present, love no longer demands self-betrayal, and leaving no longer feels like escape. What remains is integrity, the integrity of seeing clearly, the integrity of honoring limits, the integrity of choosing, without fear or illusion, whether the path leads to staying or letting go. What defines the outcome is the level of consciousness from which the choice is made. And once that consciousness is reached, regret loses its power. This is not about holding on at all costs, nor is it about walking away too quickly. It is about becoming whole enough to know the difference. If this reflection resonated with you, if it helped you see love and relationships with more depth and clarity, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Here we explore Carl Jung's psychology, the unconscious forces behind love and connection, and the inner work that leads to conscious relationships and emotional freedom. Subscribe and continue this journey inward, where true understanding begins.